On today's show, we talk about the top of the NBA draft, as you might imagine, with some recent buzz/chatter about the Hawks at number one overall. And then we preview the NBA Finals with Bill DiFilippo joining me from UPROXX and Dime. And all that is coming up.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1732 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Wednesday afternoon/evening. And today's podcast is brought to you by the folks at the Gametime app. Download the Gametime app right now, create an account, use promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase with Gametime. Terms apply. Also want to encourage you at the top of the podcast, as I always would, to make us your first listen each and every day here at Locked On Hawks. Please subscribe to the show on Apple or Spotify or Overcast. We're also on the video side over on YouTube, where you can certainly please feel free to like and subscribe to the podcast. Today's show will be joined in a second by Bill DiFilippo of Dime and UPROXX Sports, talking about the NBA Finals. But before we get to that, some NBA draft stuff at the top of the show. I should just at least plug this now. I've been doing lots and lots of draft coverage for the last several weeks, both pre-lottery and post-lottery. Brian Schroeder's been on the podcast, Bryce Simon, Bryce Hendricks, Tower Jones, Richard Stayman, et cetera. It's been a very long list of people that have already come on the podcast, and a much longer list coming up in the near future, as we are now 3 weeks or so from the NBA draft. So I'm recording this podcast. But as a PSA, some of the bad aggregation and kind of roundup stuff on social media is starting to happen with regard to what's been reported, what actually has not been reported. I won't name names, but for example, someone framed it as if Jonathan Givony of ESPN was reporting that the Hawks and Spurs have been discussing a swap for number one and sort of for 4 and 8 coming back to Atlanta. That was not actually what was reported from Givony. He kind of casually referenced the Spurs as a potential trade-up candidate on a podcast with no specifics, and it was clearly, if you listen to the podcast, not reporting that they were actually talking or aiming to do that anyway. So basically, I would say my advice right now is to be careful out there. That's always true, but especially right now, as the Hawks are going to be in a lot of chatter. That's the nature of the beast at number one overall in a wide-open draft, is that there's lots of rumor stuff that's going to be flying around. And by the way, even stuff that's reported by real credible reporters should also be taken with sort of a grain of salt right now, I would say, because it's definitely silly season and teams are trying to spin stuff. There's lots and lots of uncertainty at the top of this draft. That's not breaking news to anybody that's listening to this podcast for a while. But even if, for instance, some people are like married to Alex Sarr or Zachary Shea or even Donovan Clingan in the fan base, I think as soon as the Hawks won the lottery, there was a lot of people that are just like, all right, Alex Sarr, moving on. Let's just say in reality, that's not what's happening around the league. There's lots of chatter about different guys, and I would just keep your guard up a little bit about what is being reported out there at this point. But anyway, I got some questions in the last couple of days about what's been reported out there, some of the latest intel. So let's do that a little bit here at the top of the podcast. One of those things that I was asked about was that Kevin O'Connor of The Ringer wrote this week that the Hawks have had some trouble getting the top players to come and work out for them. First of all, I haven't really heard that as a talking point. Doesn't mean it's wrong. It just means that I haven't heard it. Second, even if that was true, you might want to consider some logic stuff here, because the Hawks only have one pick in this draft, which is number one overall, and that basically eliminates, 90% of the possible draft picks in this class from consideration. Then if you were an agent for like Rob Dillingham or Reed Shepard or one of the small guards, Devin Carter, would you want the Hawks to work your guy out? Because they're not going to draft your guy, basically. I would be pretty shocked. I won't say it's a 0% chance, but it would surprise me greatly if the Hawks took a small guard at number one overall. So that's part of this here. Also, Stephon Castle is a little more interesting case. It's been out there kind of reported a lot of different places that he does not want to work out for teams that have point guards already. I would personally advise against that if I was him. But realistically, I've not heard him in the mix for the Hawks at number one overall. And, so all that said, like, I wouldn't worry about this necessarily is what I would say right now. By the way, the reality is, we're 3 weeks away still, and that's still fairly early. I know it feels like it's been an eternity since the Hawks won the lottery, but this is still a long way to go before they actually make a choice number one overall. And by the way, one of the guys at the top of the class in Risa Shea just finished playing, hasn't even been to America yet. So just like keep that in mind. Workouts, the Hawks are not reporting workouts. At least they're not announcing workouts this year. It's a little bit different, of course, this time around at the top and nothing else. So keep that in mind. By the way, Risa Shea did a bunch of media on Tuesday as part of the NBA's overseas combine. He is flying to the U.S. shortly, if not already, for team workouts, which should include Atlanta at some point, if I had to guess. He said his best skill is his shooting, which is interesting for him to say out loud. Also, just they talked about working on his dribbling game and his sort of off the bounce game. I would agree that's a big step in his development and one of the big questions about Risacher in the future. But at least he kind of knows that at this stage. Jonathan Givony, speaking of which, on ESPN, did say on a podcast that he's heard that the Hawks and notably head coach Quinn Snyder do like Donovan Clingan. Now, earlier this week on this same podcast, I talked about Givony seemingly keeping Clingan in the mix on his reporting about the Hawks every time he talks about them. That isn't a coincidence. I think he's certainly doing it on purpose. That doesn't mean that this is necessarily going to be gospel at this point in time, but it shouldn't be a huge surprise that the Hawks might like Donovan Clingan, and also Quinn Snyder would like him as well. Not only for the defense, which is certainly his calling card still. Clingan's defense is very impressive. He is a mountain of a player, great numbers defensively on the glass, etc. at the college level. But he's also very skilled as a big guy, especially at that size, with his passing and his feel overall, which definitely applies to Snyder from what I know about Quinn. But worth just saying out loud, Quinn is not the GM. So him liking a player would certainly be notable to the front office or ownership, but he's not the guy who's making the pick at the end of the day. Keep that in mind always. Last thing here before we get to Bill, a few different mock drafts have come out in the last couple of days, as I talked about it a little bit on Monday. ESPN has not changed their projection, which is still Risacher at the top. And Givony has been kind of the guy waving the flag for Risacher for a long time. He's been number one on his board for a long time as well. Keep that in mind. But the Ringer, I think, as well as Yahoo, both changed to Risacher at the top of the draft. Does that mean anything necessarily? No, but it's just worth noting there. The other most prominent NBA draft kind of intel person is Sam Vecini of The Athletic, and he kept Alex Sarr in his top spot actually when he released a mock on Wednesday morning. He shared that what I've actually been saying quite a bit on the show and even most recently on the show on Monday, that the consensus around the Hawks is that no one knows what's going to happen around the Hawks. No one, including the Hawks themselves. Zach Lowe said the same on his podcast recently, as did Givony this week. Vecini wrote the following: the Hawks are, quote, still earlier in their process than many of the other teams at the top of the lottery, end quote. And that also, quote, this selection is still seen as being fluid, end quote. It's still early. I know it feels like it's not, but it really still is. They don't have to choose anything for quite some time now. So still pretty muddled as of Wednesday, June 5th, when I'm recording this podcast. Also, Sam wrote Sarr, Risacher, and Clingan are kind of the guys that he mentioned at the top of the draft. It seems like most people around the league that I talk to and that I read, et cetera, on record, off record, are zeroing in on that trio being the most likely trio to be in the mix and number one overall. I would not go as far as to say that it is 100% going to be one of those three guys. Would I say 90+%? Probably at this point in time, based on what I know. But someone asked me that just plainly today, like, is there any chance at all that it's not one of the three guys? And I would say yes. It's still too early for me to say that there's no chance of that. Medical stuff, all that stuff. So we'll see. But I do think that if I had to guess, or I would say strongly project right now, the Hawks picking one of the guys at the top, it would be either Sarr, Risacher, or Clingan in that spot. But certainly TBD on whether that will change in the near future. Obviously, we'll have more on the draft stuff coming up in the future, but I want to at least touch on a little bit of that stuff midweek here because I've been getting questions, et cetera, and the chatter is picking up a little bit across the league with the NBA Finals about to start on Thursday. It's basically finals and draft right now across the league, and the Hawks are in the driver's seat when it comes to the draft itself. All right, that's all I have on this segment. After a break, to hear from our partners on today's podcast, we'll talk about Bill, and when it comes to the NBA Finals, lots of angles here on the Celtics, the Mavs, the betting angles at FanDuel, et cetera. But first, a word from our partners on today's podcast, and the first of which is the folks at Gametime. Today's show is brought to you by the folks at Gametime. And Gametime is an authorized ticket marketplace at the NBA, which makes getting playoff tickets even faster and easier than it was before. That's the case for the NBA Finals as well. They're coming up very, very soon as you listen to this podcast. I know I love to be there as well. And the code tip, last minute deals, all-in prices, views from receipts, and the lowest price guarantee are all in the mix at Gametime. That makes it a fantastic option to make things easy for you when it comes to buying tickets. I've been using Gametime for quite some time now. It's coming handy for me a number of different times when it comes to tickets for the Braves or the Falcons, as well as concert stuff, shows around the city, and more. Save a ton of different money options on Gametime app when buying last minute tickets for concerts, sports, comedy, theater, and much more. They have flash deals. You can save and also save even more when you choose a section. Actually, let Gametime choose the seats for you within that section. They also have an awesome feature where you can actually toggle to make sure the total's up front. No surprise fees to when you get to that checkout screen at the very end. Get a panoramic view of the seats when it comes to the view that you will actually have before you buy. And you are also getting the lowest price possible with the folks at the Gametime app. Take all the guesswork out of buying tickets right now by using the Gametime app. Download the app right now, create an account, use promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account with Gametime, redeem that promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. He is my friend. He is my editor. He is the only person on this podcast that likes Seth Lundy more than I do. Hello, Bill. How are you?
I'm doing great, Brad. How are you, man?
I'm well. I appreciate you jumping on to do a little finals talk. You are preceded by the real headline stuff when it comes to the Hawks, which is number one pick talk. You don't have to have an opinion, but have you decided who you would like the Hawks to take in number one overall? I didn't prep you for this at
all. No, I haven't really gotten a chance to really dive into draft stuff with everything with the finals going on and whatnot. But they are interesting just because like it's very rare that a team that has some level of expectation to compete is picking number one. So I'm very interested in like how the Hawks end up approaching it because a lot of the teams that draft number one, you can draft a ball of clay and like, I don't know. Do you think the Hawks have that luxury or?
No, I mean, maybe they will, and we just don't know it yet. Maybe they're going to go into this rebuild that I don't necessarily foresee, but you're right. I mean, I've talked about it a little bit, but it's like, most teams, you might have one guy that you like, you win the lottery. You might have like, maybe you have your guy or someone like, let's just say if Detroit had won the lottery, right? They have Kate.
Yeah.
They have a guy they like. But you might have one. The Hawks have, you could argue, as many as three, depending on how you feel about Trey and DeJounte, and they'll probably pick them up, all that stuff. But like Jalen Johnson's the guy they love. Like they think Jalen Johnson's going to be a star. So like they don't have the luxury of just like, all right, best player available, no matter what the context is. Because if that player was, I don't know, Rob Dillingham or Reed Shepherd, are you going to pair that guy with Trey Young? I kind of think not.
No.
So you're right. It's a very interesting situation, and also given that this class, there's like a very strong possibility that whoever they draft is not one of their best 5 players next year. Like if they draft Alex Sarr, especially, Alex Sarr isn't going to be a starting level player for them in October. No. So like it's just this really interesting thing where like how often does a number one overall pick not start their first game?
Yeah, I mean, if my read on the draft, again, having admitted I haven't done nearly enough homework yet, is that like if they want to draft a guy who can step in and be, like you mentioned, one of their 5 best players right away, like they should take Dalton Knecht number one, and he will never be better than their 5th best player. So
well, I mean, the other guy would be Kling. I mean, I think Klingon might be able to be might be able to be a starting level player pretty quickly. But yeah, you're right. I mean, I will not do any more draft with you. I just I felt it necessary to at least ask the question because obviously you are not in draft mode yet. Because look, I said this actually before I brought you in. Right now, it's finals and draft, right? The whole league is doing this split. If you're covering the finals, you're covering the finals. And if you're not, you're kind of in draft mode. When the finals end, everyone kind of pivots to draft mode. And that's kind of when the real lights come on. Like when you start getting the Woj bombs on the draft, it's usually post-finals. It's not usually until that's actually over or until the Lakers hire a coach, which I guess they kind of already have done that, but they won't say it.
Yeah. Listen, anyway. JJ Redick cannot wait for the NBA Finals to end to talk about his candidacy for being the head coach of the Los Angeles Lakers. He cannot wait.
I hope Mike Breen. NBA Finals. I hope Mike Breen asks him about it in the open to game 1.
Oh, I hope Mike Breen just calls him coach.
And I'm joined today by Doris Burke and Coach JJ Redick of the Los Angeles Lakers. Anyway, okay, we'll move on to the actual task at hand, which is the finals. Look, I don't cover these teams every day, but you and I cover the NBA together at times. Interesting finals, I think. It's not maybe an all-time pre-finals matchup, but it's certainly a pretty appetizing one. You got the team, and I wonder if you agree with this framing or not. You have the team that, while not everybody trusts Boston, they have the numbers of an all-time great team when it comes to net rating and wins and all those things. Then you have Dallas is playing really well, and they have 2 stars, one of which is a consensus top 5-ish player in the league in Luka. So that's a pretty interesting clash on its own. What do you make of this? And we'll kind of dive in forward. Like, where's your head at with the series right now as it begins in 28 hours as we're recording this podcast?
It's fascinating to me because you mentioned the big thing to me, which is that the 1996 Chicago Bulls, the 1997 Chicago Bulls are the only 2 teams to have a better net rating in a season than this Celtics team. This Celtics team's net rating was the same as the 2017 Warriors, which is the first year that they had Kevin Durant in town. So like by all accounts, we should be sitting here going, we are watching an historically great team in the NBA Finals. And yet Boston just like, I don't want to say they haven't earned that respect, they haven't earned that trust from the public, but like they've gotten here so many times that I think they're not going to be able to kind of silence the people who will hear that stuff and roll their eyes unless they actually win a ring. And it's, to me, the most fascinating subplot of this entire series, which is that we are watching a team that we should be considering one of the, by the numbers, one of the 3, 5, 10 best basketball teams we've ever seen. And the only thing standing in between them is a team that up until February, nobody really took seriously because they didn't have much of a reason to take this team seriously. So
yeah,
it seemed like, I feel like, and you can tell me if I'm wrong here, Brad. I feel like there's a bit of overcomplicating this going on, and just looking at this series for what it is, there should be a lot of, there should be so much more faith in Boston being able to take care of business. But like you mentioned, the best player in the series is on Dallas, and Boston has built up a reputation, and reputations can be hard to shake. So like the whole thing is fascinating. This is a legitimately fascinating NBA Finals to me for about a million different reasons.
Yeah, like the point you're making is right. And it's kind of funny because of the two of us, as we often joke, I am more of the numbers guy than you are. Right. Generally speaking, and I feel like the true numbers guys, like I can probably name names, but are still like in the, no, Boston's a massive favorite in the series. Look at what they've done. Yeah. And I get it. And that's a very appealing point to me. I have you can't see my notes, but I had the point about the Warriors. Like no one's even been close to them as far as their regular season profile since that team in 2017. That's 7 years ago. No one's been close to them since then, as far as this is concerned. And in the playoffs, well, they haven't played anybody. That's fair to say by playoff standards. They do have a plus 10 or 11 net rating in the playoffs. You can't fake that either. You still got to win the games. So that's on one hand. On the other, it's like, okay, I do kind of just implicitly understand not believing in this Celtics team on the biggest stage, because we've kind of seen it. Now, it's important to note, and many have said this, but it's not the same team. They got Drew this time around, and we think they're going to have Porzingis. By all accounts, he's supposed to be playing game one. He might not be himself, but he's going to be out there. Mm-hmm. And while he's not proven at this level either, he's still a really good player. And if nothing else, this is very skeptical of him, and I'm not. He's had a great year. You could just argue like he's a lot better than Xavier Tillman and Luke Cornett. Like they've been playing Al Horford 34 minutes a game for like 2 weeks. So anyway, I get it. And I honestly kind of, how do I say this? If this team had not failed in the way they have failed previously, I think everyone would pick Boston. Agreed. Like everyone. But because we've seen it with Tatum and Brown. It's really just Tatum and Brown that have actually been there the whole time. Everybody else has kind of changed out at this point in time on this coach, supporting cast, but we've just kind of seen it with those guys, and until they break through. And you mentioned it briefly, I think I did too. Like there's the old adage, which is still kind of true. Best player in the series is on the other side. All those things get thrown in there, and like as we'll get into in a second, FanDuel, our friends over there, make Boston a pretty big favorite, minus 225 right now. But by the numbers, they should be like minus 400, 500. Like they should be a very, very, very big favorite with home court and disadvantage, and they're not right now. Today's show is brought to you by PrizePicks. With PrizePicks, you turn $10 into $1,000 in a single game when watching your favorite sports this summer. You can make a PrizePicks lineup in just as little as 60 seconds, and that makes it huge if you are as busy as I am at times. All you have to do is pick more or pick less than a certain number of stat projections for 2 to 6 players, and you're locked in from there. PrizePicks is America's #1 fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. Get on the daily action with your friends and become part of the PrizePicks community right now today. The finals mean even more. PrizePicks is started the star players. You can get boosted payouts with select basketball stars when you won't find anywhere else. And when finals are over, the hoops action does not stop at PrizePicks. Women's basketball is just getting started as well. You have stars like Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese, and 100 times the cash watching them ball out as well. PrizePicks is the best way to get actioned on sports in more than 30 states across the country, including California, Texas, and Georgia. They have quick withdrawals as well. Download the PrizePicks app right now and use promo code LOCKEDONNBA for first-time deposit match up to $100. Again, download that app. It's PrizePicks and use code LOCKEDONNBA when you get there for first-time deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy with PrizePicks.
One reason that we like sports generally is that we can lay out all these numbers, we can lay out all the objective reasons why, and then the first game tips off. And
yes.
Dallas opens the game on a 18-3 run. And that crowd in Boston gets really antsy. And Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, after walking around with such like a confidence about them for the first 3 rounds of the playoffs, start to hang their heads a little bit. And Lucas starts to kind of put some things together. And he just spends the rest of the series taking it to, like, the reasons we like sports are because teams like the Boston Celtics don't win every single time.
That's true.
Having said that, teams like the Boston Celtics tend to win when
they do win.
Yeah.
That's a good point. Yes.
So it's fun, and I'm glad you mentioned Porzingis because I think that is to me, and I don't know about you, to me the big thing in this series is that if you promise me Kristaps Porzingis by game 3 he's got the rust off and he's playing like himself, I really struggle to find a path for Dallas to win this series that is not Luka just puts up a top 3 NBA Finals performance of all time.
Which he could do that.
Which he could.
Yeah, but you're right.
Did you see the quotes in recent days from our pal Tim Bontemps over at ESPN from Kristaps Porzingis about basically his status, his health, all these sorts of things?
I did. Shout out to Tim, by the way. He's not listening to this podcast, but maybe I'll text him after this and tell him that we talked about him.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of quotes. Porzingis was asked if he's 100% after a pause, says, "I don't know. We'll see." He says, "Plan to play in game 1. Every day gives me a bit more time to get better." When asked if he was running pain-free, Kristaps Porzingis had a very long pause, then said, yes. Conditioning, he said, it's open as to how, Porzingis is kind of the guy that makes this Celtics team. Like, for how great Jason Tatum is, for how great Jaylen Brown is, for how nasty that backcourt is, for how great of a professional Al Horford is, and how, if not for LeBron James and being LeBron James, we would marvel at the fact that Al Horford is still as good as he is at this age. We should marvel at how good Al Horford is. But Porzingis, to me, is the guy who, when he's in there and he is playing at his best, he's the guy that takes the Celtics from a really good basketball team to a potentially all-time great basketball team. So seeing him maybe not be 100%, maybe struggle to get some of the rust off, all these sorts of things, that's hanging over this series in such a big way. Would you agree with that? Porzingis is kind of, if there's one player that you're watching in all of this that can swing this wildly in one way or another, it's him.
Yeah, it kind of has to be. And, on one hand, there's a lot of room in the series, between games and between series. It's not a every other day situation, which in theory would help him because it takes longer. It might also help Luka because he's kind of dragging that knee around, and it seems like, and he just had a week off, and I don't know what that's going to mean. But you're right. I mean, I kind of flippantly made it was kind of a joke about going from Cornet or whoever Tillman to Porzingis being a huge thing. But I don't think we're going to see Porzingis playing the kind of workload that you would normally see a starter play. At least not right away. It's gonna. I mean, I think he's gonna play in game 1 by all accounts. But you're right. It's kind of an eyebrow-raising set of quotes, and he unlocks their style. All these guys come together to do what they do, but having a center who is legitimately 7'2", 7'3", who can bomb and also post up, so you can't switch on him. That is kind of the piece that swings their offense. Defensively, he's huge, which helps. They're kind of similar defensively as long as Horford's in there with the 5 guys they have. But, offensively, I feel like they're very switchable unless they have Porzingis. And that means, and for what Dallas can do, especially with Lively out there who can switch and is really athletic, Boston's just a lot easier to, don't get me wrong, they're not easy to guard. They're still really hard to guard. They are easier to guard if it's Horford at center versus Porzingis at center. They just are.
Yeah, and a big part of this series, I think, when Boston's on offense and Dallas is on defense is just where those centers are going to be. Where are Daniel Gafford? Where is Derek Lively? What guy are they going to be guarding? Because if Al Horford is out there, for how good Al Horford is, you could put Daniel Gafford on him and have him cheat off of Al Horford and basically say, all right, if Al's going to go 8 for 12 from 3, you tip your cap and you move on. If Porzingis is in there, like, that becomes a little bit more difficult, because if you leave Porzingis open from 3 and basically say, we want Derek Lively, we want Daniel Gafford to be kind of floating, protecting the rim, doing all these sorts of things, they're going to kill you. And then you have to have the conversation about, do you want him on Derek White? Do you want him on Drew Holiday? Like, the matchup, like, they're just a matchup nightmare when you have to worry about Porzingis in there. But then if it turns into 30 minutes of Al Horford, if it turns into 10 minutes of Luke Cornett, 10 minutes of Xavier Tillman, whatever that is, the entire complexion of how Boston is going to try to attack and how Dallas is going to try and defend them completely changes. And all of a sudden, because suddenly it's a lot easier to see how this Boston offense could end up getting stuck in the mud, and kind of some of those old demons end up popping up against the Dallas team that has been battle tested, particularly on the defensive end of the floor throughout this run, and have had an answer seemingly every single time.
Yeah, I think that it's going to be, he's a very, very important piece there. So, of course, we could go all day on this, but, it's not as simple as Luka being the best player in the series. But is there a pathway for Dallas to win the series if Luka is not the best player in the series?
It comes down to basically 2 guys, and this isn't like breaking news or anything, but if PJ Washington and Derek Jones Jr. and maybe a little bit of Maxi Kleber, maybe a little bit of Josh Green, maybe Tim Hardaway ends up coming back into the rotation, but primarily primarily Washington and Jones, you're going to get open looks as the guys who stand in the corner when Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving are on the floor. And we saw during the Oklahoma City series that when one of those guys, in this case PJ Washington, is able to hit the open looks that get generated by Doncic and Irving, 29 points in a 9-point win in game 2, 27 points in a 4-point win in game 3. Dallas isn't here if PJ Washington doesn't suddenly catch an all-time heater by his standards from behind the 3-point line. So if that path is going to emerge for them, Kyrie has to be, what did LeBron James call him this week? The most talented player to ever live?
Something like that. Yeah, it was in that vein.
I would disagree with that in large part because I think the guy who said that is probably the most talented player to ever live. But
fair.
Kyrie has to be that kind of guy. Kyrie has to be the kind of guy who can basically say, Luka, I'll take it from here. I'll be a guy who averages 27, 28 points per game in this series. And then PJ Washington and then Derek Jones, they're able to keep Dallas honest from behind the 3-point line. Gafford and Lively, they eat on the offensive glass and get those extra possessions that can be so crucial in a 5-point NBA Finals game. It basically requires everyone but Luka playing at their best. And I think that's why I have such a hard time seeing Dallas winning this series, Brad. It's because either Luka has to play at his absolute best and everyone else has to benefit from that, or like 8 other guys have to have the best playoff series that they've ever had to compensate for the fact that Luka isn't in their respective roles. Like, I'm not saying Daniel Gafford suddenly has to average 25 and 12, but like in their respective roles to offset the fact that Luka is, his knee is bugging him a little bit more, his shot isn't falling, all these sorts of things.
I think that if Boston plays, I'm not going to say their best. If Boston plays an A- B+ series, they're going to win.
Yeah,
I think. That. Now, this is not, the betting markets are not your expertise necessarily, but I mentioned the number before that Boston's a decent sized favorite. basically the median outcome, projected outcome is, Boston's minus 1.5 games in the series. So like the most, that's kind of like the bet that's actually a coin flip versus the actual spread. I wonder what happens if Dallas steals game one. Mm-hmm. So we're recording this podcast. Again, it's tomorrow as we're recording this podcast. You got maybe some rust for Boston. Could be rust for Dallas too. But like, what's the so we'll fast forward. What's the I'm not saying it's going to happen. What's the reaction if Dallas wins game one in Boston? Exactly.
Boy. Yeah. I mean, that's when, like,
it's also, I guess it also matters how it happens. I should at least acknowledge that. Like, if Luka has 50 in game one and they win, that's a different reaction than if Boston just like shoots 4 for 45 from 3 and loses. You know what I mean? It's kind of it's a different thing.
Yeah, for sure. Like, and that's all. But that's also when, like, those kind of ghosts that we talked about earlier and like the weight of history start coming in. And like, for everything that this Boston team has kind of done this year, having to deal with that level of adversity is like, I just want to see that as a fan of basketball above everything else. I think it would be fascinating to watch how this Boston team deals with, we're down 0-1 in this series and all of a sudden, like, all hell is breaking loose, even though we're only 1-0 down in a playoff series.
Well, we know what Mazzulla would say. It would be the flattest press conference of all time. He would not panic at all. He'd talk about the town at least 3 times in the presser. What did he say today? Something else. He said something today that was very funny about just like him just being himself. He just says nothing.
I have the quote right here.
I just found it too.
Joe Mazzulla on preparing for the quote-unquote bright lights of the NBA Finals. Unless they change the bulbs in the arena, there won't be any lights brighter than the last series.
That's just peak Mazzulla right there. And look,
that's right.
It might work. And honestly, you could argue that if you lose game one, you might want the like no panic guy at the helm.
Exactly.
And they're kind of a laid back team. I don't mean that in a negative way, but like they don't have, Tatum's pretty chill. Jaylen Brown could be fiery sometimes, but like Drew's pretty chill. Derek White's pretty chill. Like they don't really have like that. Like Marcus Smart's not walking through the door, if that makes sense. They don't have that guy that's like the rah guy right now. I'm not sure if that's good or bad, but I can guarantee you one more thing before we get out of here. Boston's gonna have a game where they shoot 5 for 40 from 3, and the hashtag discourse after that game will be just a lot to witness, because it'll be all about how they should stop shooting threes and all those things.
And that's what makes your question about what happens if Dallas loses game one so fun. There's a very boring answer to that, which is everything that they did in game one that like happened in a loss, they're just going to do that again in game two.
It'll be the exact same team, it just with different variants. Right. You would think.
There are basically 2 kinds of coaches. There is the coach who has plan A, and then he has plan B, and then he has plan C and D, and blah, 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 blah. And then there are the coaches who has plan A, and then their plan B is that you do plan A better. And that's Joe Mazzulla. Like Joe Mazzulla, and I would say to his credit, I mean, it's very easy to knock him for this, but like to his credit, when your plan A is as good as Boston's plan A has been this year, when you've been able to rely on what has gotten you here, and when you continue to rely on what has gotten you here, like, that's so much smarter than all of a sudden saying, all right, we need something new. We're going to dump it down to Jason in the low post, and he's going to, try and do God knows what on the low block for 10 possessions a game. Like, when the going gets tough for Boston, we know that they are going to just try and shake themselves off, go out there and do what they do, which is admirable, which is commendable, which lends itself to, like what you're mentioning, a game where they lose because that's not working and suddenly it becomes this whole thing. But it's also the reason why I am picking them to win this series, like, because I just think if Boston does what they do, they're going to be NBA champions.
Yeah, I think, let's get out of here, I think that they are the better team. I think that if you said pick the winner of the series, I would pick Boston. I do, something in my brain tells me that I think Dallas is a live underdog in the series. I think Dallas can win it. I think that they have a better chance than you do based on this conversation.
Yeah.
But I still pick Boston. And again, I think the rational side of my brain is like Boston pretty easily, and then the less rational eyes and heart side tells a different story. But even then, even that side, I think I still take Boston because I don't think Dallas is an all-time great team. They're playing really well right now. Luka's great, Kyrie's great, and especially as the number 2 guy is great. But you get a lot of uncertainty after that. I mean, Derek Lively, man, we don't have time for it, but Derek Lively has been unbelievable for a rookie. For a rookie, Bill. I mean, he's basically a Penn State guy at this point. We could talk about that.
We are.
Before Lamar Stevens' ring ceremony in Boston, do you go to Boston for it? Do you fly to Boston for Lamar Stevens' ring ceremony?
I strongly consider it.
There you go. Bill, thank you for being here. You're picking Boston. You're on the record. Do you want to give games? I don't care if you give games or not. If you want to give a game prediction, you can.
I'll say 6 games. I think Boston loses one because they just have a game where their shots don't fall.
Well, they do Boston things.
And out of respect to Luka, I think Luka has one game where he just where there's just absolutely nothing Boston could do against him. But 6 games, I know that means that I'm picking Boston to win on Dallas's home floor.
And that's fine. Yeah.
Which some people get terrified of that. Whatever. I've
actually seen a lot of people that are leaning toward Dallas, picking Dallas in 7, which is not what you would normally see. But I've heard this explanation multiple times now. It's like, well, if you get to game 7, who do you like more, Luka or the? And it's like, well, I get it, but it's also a game would be in Boston. I think it's because Luka's been so good in those game 7s, but on the road, like the one in Phoenix and then the one they just had in Minnesota, and then Boston's Boston, and it's that same fear. So if you're picking Dallas, you kind of already think that Boston might just be Boston. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
anyway,
there's nothing that Boston could throw at Luka in a game 7 that will intimidate him more than a EuroLeague game in an Eastern European gym.
I thought you were going to go more than playing a Piscataway on a Tuesday. That's where you were going.
Listen, he's never shown that he could do that. Objectively, he has never shown that he could do that.
100% accurate. Bill, anything to plug before you out of here? We should plug the website that you write for full time.
Yeah, over at Dime, over on UPROXX Sports, where just finals are happening. It's cool. Like this is to quote Zach Lowe, this is the reason why we do this. So
that is true.
Fun time.
Dime got a lot of shine today for Megan's piece about Cameron Brink. That went like semi-viral today. That's cool. We like people checking out dimemag.com. Great place to read about basketball content and then other sports things when we feel like writing about other sports things. Robbie had great access to the college football video games stuff.
That's right.
Broke a lot of news about that. So anyway, thanks for being here, Bill. I appreciate you, my friend.
I appreciate you.
As for everybody else, please subscribe to this podcast. I'll be back again soon. I'm not exactly sure when about the draft, but lots of draft coverage in the next 3 weeks. I promise you that. So stay tuned for that. Subscribe. I'll see you next time.